Sorry. Great, so let's start. It's o'clock, whatever time it is for everyone in the world. Good morning, welcome to this TCI North American chapter webinar. This is the first of what we hope is an enlightening journey for North American members of the TCI. We want this webinar to be the first and initial step of our TCI North America chapter. My name is Patricia Valdenebro. I am the CEO of the TCI network. I'm going to introduce you a little bit for those of you who don't know what is TCI and what we do, a bit of our network. This is the place where the experts in clusters and innovation ecosystems interact, learn, and get inspired. We are the global network with more than 500 active members, 78 organizations in more than 100 countries. And through our activities, more than 9,000 practitioners have participated. And we like to think that we have helped them to increase their professional and improve their professional development. This is a picture of the members that we have today. Our vision is to expand the power of collaboration towards more inclusive and sustainable societies. And precisely that's one of the topics that is bringing us together today, sustainability. And our mission is to inspire and strengthen connections, knowledge, and competences for people and organizations working with clusters and innovation ecosystems around the globe. We have three strategic areas of work. Together with our members, we build global connections, we inspire clusters, and we provide policy learning for all type of members that we have. Our activities, like most of you probably need to adapt to the current situation with the pandemic and the coronavirus. From the beginning, we went online, mobilizing the network. We send a message saying we are all in this together. This is something where the clusters can play a powerful role and ignite new collaborative solutions to this situation. This is one of the pictures of our members gathering. And then we try to do many virtual workshops, all webinars like this, you know, to bring together common expertise on common solutions on what others are doing, what could be useful for us and for our places. We also recapitulate many stories that we heard through these months in this guide. That is Tci Recovery Playbook. It's a guide for economic development organizations, of our cluster organizations, on how to help today and how to get prepared for tomorrow, for this new normal that we like to call it the new better normal. We want to think that this is a great opportunity to do things in another way, in a better way. And this is a publication that is available in our website, and you can download. It's written by Merete Daniel Nielsen, who is with us today, and by Christian Kettles from Harvard Business School. And I think it's a great tool to organize ideas, to frame a bit what to do, what is the direction, the strategic direction to take in these difficult days. And then another activity that, initiatives that we have within our network are the chapters. We have ongoing chapters in Latin America, in Asia, and in Oceania. Those are gatherings from members in those areas that look for synergies and who want to build together local agendas to move forward in this collaboration scheme. We we have thought for many months now, after our successful conference in Toronto some years ago, to continue the work mainly in Canada, where we have a couple of members working on clusters, and also in the US, and to build the momentum and to continue the conversation that we started. And so we ask Dorinda So, who is with us today also, to help us to start this community of cluster practitioners in Canada and the US. Thank you, Dorinda, for taking the lead on this, also with our director in North America, Vincent Dugré, who is part of the board of directors that Merete, where Merete is the president. So, well, we will hear more from us. This is just the starting point, but we will build on some interesting topics, and we hope some of you will be joining more actively in this conversation. I give the word to Merete Daniel-Nielsen, our president, to say some opening words. Hello, Merete. Merete is, apart from the president of TCI, also co-founder of Cluster Excellence Denmark and director of Cluster Excellence Denmark. It's the Denmark program for the professionalization of the Danish clusters. And well, she will let you know more what they are doing, especially in these times for more innovative clusters. Hello, Merete.
Hello, Patricia. Thank you. And yeah, so a big thank you for all of you joining us for this session. As Patricia says, this is a very unique moment in time, and it's great to reconnect with Canada and Dorinda that did such a great job in organizing our global conference back in 2018. So it's yeah, it could be great to be with you, but it's at least great that we are able now to start up softly on this ambition we had for a while to start this North American chapter. So that's also a very big moment for us in the network. Back then we also discussed about sustainability and clusters and the green economy. So it's not a new topic for TCI, but it's definitely growing right now. So it's really embedded in our vision in TCI that this power of collaboration with the clusters, this has to have a focus on sustainability and inclusiveness. So with the recovery in mind, we cannot forget about green transition. We need to integrate it even more now. So that's, if it wasn't difficult before now, but we have even more now on the plate, and we have to integrate it in the way forward. We know in Europe we have around 250 green clusters, but we also know that more and more clusters now are integrating the green focus in other sectors, and this is a global movement. So that's good news for all of us very occupied with sustainability and green transition. So again, a unique moment for this webinar to help both with the recovery and the refocus on green sustainability as well. We also know that clusters are quite good at this, so they're really good on, improving or implementing policies. So so helping to turn activities into strategies into activities is very, very good thing in the clusters. So they basically help companies with new competencies, new innovations, new business possibilities, and also access to funding. As Patricia mentioned, we touched upon this in our recovery playbook and got some nice cases on this as well. But also for TCI, we will in August send out a survey and finding more cases again and get a current and updated picture on what is happening around sustainability and clusters and finding more cases. So I'm really looking forward to this webinar and get back to the Canadian clusters and hear what you've been doing over the last 2 years. I know you're always very busy, so I'm really looking forward to this webinar.
Thank you, Merete. Thank you very much. Yeah, indeed. Well, we are very much looking forward to hear what our Canadian friends are doing. Let me introduce you then, Dorinda. I also fix your your video here. Hello, Dorinda So. Dorinda is director from Point A, working also on sustainability in transportation, and also mobilizing a lot of stakeholders around. And she's today in her role as moderator of this webinar. By the way, we have around 170 participants registered for the webinar. I am going to moderate the Q&A part at the end, but please, whatever comment, analysis, or question you may have for the speakers or one of us, let us know in the chat or in the Q&A feature, and I will intercalate it during the conversation. We are also recording this webinar for further dissemination among the members of the TCI network. Dorinda, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. And as both Marta and Patricia mentioned, I was very involved with the TCI network, and I'm really excited to be joining all of you today in my kind of new role, now that I've found my way back into kind of a green cluster. Also want to say thank you for the opportunity to moderate. I know this is probably one of the first times we're kind of jointly moderating a webinar, so thank you for that. And so our webinar today focuses on really how clusters can contribute to more sustainable recovery. And I think it affects, you know, the issues of sustainability and climate change affect all of us. And as Marta mentioned, clusters is a really great and effective way of looking at both sustainability and economic recovery. Now, when we think about Canada and clusters, I know many of you think about our 5 super clusters. And don't worry, we will be talking about them today, primarily through Vincent Dugray's work. He's doing quite a bit of work with a number of our super clusters. And also our super clusters are really doing a lot in terms of recovery. They're investing millions of dollars into innovations to help stop the spread of COVID-19 and to help us recover. So really looking forward to hearing more about what they're doing to help us kind of move forward. So a bit about how we're going to proceed. We're going to have each of our panelists speak and share so you get to know who they are. Don't worry, we have slides so you can follow along. And then I'm going to ask them a series of questions, and then we're going to turn the time over to all of you. So if you have questions, feel free to put those into the Q&A box throughout. Obviously, there is the chat function, as Patricia mentioned. Patricia might kind of jump in here and there with questions as well. But that's how we are going to proceed today. So we're going to start off with Rob McMonagle. He's the closest to me because we're both located in Toronto, Canada. Rob is the senior advisor of the green sector, and he works for the City of Toronto's Economic Development and Culture Department. So I'm going to pass the floor over to Rob.
Super, thank you, Dorinda. I'm glad to be here today. It's quite a great event, okay, to be able to share kind of best practices on cluster development in Canada. So as Dorinda mentioned, I'm with the City of Toronto. I'm in economic development, and I'm in one of the few, I guess, municipal offices in Canada that actually focus on sectors or clusters. And don't worry about the slides. I'm going to send a link to everyone in the chat box after I finish talking. I just want to kind of give you a little bit of the context of the green sector. So we do have, and we categorize the green sectors in Toronto really into 5 very distinct sectors. One of the advantages of working with a municipal government is we can actually delve down to get a fairly significant level of detail about the size and capacities of the sectors. So this is what I'm trying to show basically here, is that we have good information on the size of the green sectors in Toronto. Next slide. Whereas the first slide really was kind of a snapshot about the current situation, it's really not useful in an economic development perspective, simply because it's just a snapshot. What's the most important thing really is doing that snapshot over a long period of time so that you can start to seeing trends and also, you know, the impact of programs you might be focusing on. So I'm just going to, you know, I've circled the bioeconomy because it's actually a very small sector in Toronto, but it's an area that we did a little bit of focus on in developing the cluster. And we'll talk about the difference between sectors and clusters shortly. And I kind of use it interchangeably here. But you can see, for example, that the green sectors overall in Toronto has actually been growing at about double the rate of the city economy, which is actually quite good. So we've been averaging over the last 5 years a growth of around 4%, okay, whereas in Toronto total, okay, it's been averaging about 2% a year. And in some of the sectors, and particularly the bioeconomy, for example, the gross domestic product of that sector has grown quite significantly. Next slide. So, and this is a good example of a cluster program. This is why I thought I'd start talking about that, okay, is that we had over a 5-year period between 2012 and 2017, what we call an urban wood industry growth initiative. And it was a very small cluster of companies. So there was about 25, 26 companies in the supply chain. There's huge shortages in the supply chain. So we went through a whole process of how we build the supply chain in the urban wood industry. And we were pretty successful in that. At the start, there was about 100 employees. By the end, okay, we were tracking about 800. And as you saw from the previous, you know, growth, that sector has actually been growing the fastest of any sector or cluster in Toronto. Next slide. And we've recently focusing now on looking at how do we build another cluster in the green sectors. So our focus is really on the bike cluster. There's a huge demand for bikes around the world. Most of the bike shops are actually sold out in Toronto and I think across North America at the present time. So we've been going through an analysis of what we can do to build up that local bike cluster. So we've done, you know, both supply chain analysis, and that's really what you see up top, and that's kind of the linkages between all the elements of a cluster, as well as looking at where are the companies geographically in the bike cluster. So, you know, are there clustering already going, and are there ways of building those supply chains locally further? And of course, one of the important things we can do is promote the local company. So we just released recently a directory of made bikes. And I think that's it for my slides and my introduction.
Great, thank you, Rob. So next we are going to move to the West Coast with Michaela Newberger, who's the Director of Operations at ZebX. And let's hear from you, Michaela.
That's great. Thanks so much for the introduction. And yes, I'm very excited to be here. I'm the Director of Operations for the Zero Emissions Building Exchange in Vancouver, BC. We are a center of excellence for high performance buildings. And I thought, just because we have such a global audience, that it was going to be good to give some introduction of British Columbia. So British Columbia, or BC in short, is Canada's most western province, bordered by the Pacific Ocean. The population of BC is about almost 5 million people. And just to give you a sense, I think it's often not very easy to imagine how vast and how big BC is. So it's very sparsely populated. In terms of size, British Columbia is bigger than most provinces or countries indeed in the world. It's about twice the size of California, and for European context, it's about 2.5 times the size of Germany. And so BC's economy has traditionally been very focused on, I would say, resource extraction from forestry to fishing. And that has shifted, of course, in recent decades. It's, however, also a very young province. I think that's also something, I'm European myself, and living in Vancouver, which is BC's biggest city, and knowing that here the oldest buildings are just over 100, maximum 150 years old, as can sometimes feel very strange. But yes, other sectors in the economy that are strong now are ecotourism. There's a lot of technology and service companies that have grown, as well as the film industry and media in general. And one of the things I wanted to point out as well is that BC is very well positioned for clean tech development. And we've realized, so recently, I'm going to speak about this a little bit more, but the clean tech strategy was recently developed. And as part of that, there was an inventory was made of clean tech companies. And so half of Canada's clean tech companies, small SMEs, are based in British Columbia. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in terms of the way the Zero Emission Building Exchange, or ZEBEX, works, as I said, we're a center of excellence for high performance buildings. And so what that means is really that we foster innovation and collaboration and build capacity in the industry for high performance buildings and really progressive zero emission building practices. And so what we do, we work a lot with early adopters and the leaders in the industry to kind of extract learning and solutions from them of how to build high performance buildings most cost effectively. And then we share that with the industry at large. And so I think it's important to also highlight that what allows ZEBEX to operate is really a very progressive regulatory environment. So Vancouver and British Columbia in general has some of the most progressive zero emission building policies in Canada. And what we do is we develop a lot of resources for the industry, case studies, technology primers, things like that. And then we also organize a host of events from building tours to dialogues with industry to workshops, different courses, depending on what we identify are the biggest needs to share with industry. And yeah, that's basically in a nutshell. And to the next slide, please. I just briefly wanted to, as I mentioned, highlight that a clean tech cluster strategy was just released for BC. So it's something that is nascent, but there has been a recognition among the provincial government that a more formalized clean tech cluster would really be beneficial for BC. And so ZEBEX was actually, we were just tangentially consulted for this around the built environment, but otherwise this was, this strategy was developed by Foresight Clean Tech Cluster Accelerator. And yeah, with this, I'm happy to talk later about some of the recommendations that have come out of this strategy development. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you, Michaela. And last, but certainly not least, especially because he's a director on the Tci board, is Vincent Degray, and Vincent also is a co-founder of Visio. So over to you, Vincent, in Quebec.
Thank you very much. So I use my time to give you some information of what have either been involved with clusters in Canada, or some of my colleagues who have shared with me information in the last few days. So I give you accurate information on what is actually happening in Canada, especially under the COVID-19, what I call the accelerated call for proposal, and all the way that the different cluster or the initiative or at the policy level, things has evolved to make things happen more quickly, to ensure either the sustainability of organization at the cluster level, but as well as the SMEs and the stakeholders that are part of our innovative territories and cluster around Canada. So a lot of people knows me from my involvement in TCI, so I don't use my time for present myself or my company, so it's easy to find me. So at the Canadian level, what I've seen very interesting, you were talking about super clusters, so I'm involved with at least 3 of them right now. for a special COVID initiative, as I previously said. Mentioning Scale AI, you know, for those who are in Toronto, we had the panels from the supercluster. They held a workshop at the hotel, so they were around. You had a chance maybe to speak with them. They are doing tremendous thing at the Canadian level, but you know, being able also to go not only where they are located, you know, they are spread around Canada, specifically attached to competitive advantage of particular region, but they have let's say that since 3 years they have been able to work together. And what we see now very interesting is sometimes that happen. We are under proposal and their CTOs and colleagues from the 3 supercluster on the same meeting. So that's very cool, because they sometimes can leverage on specific, let's say, a field of a project, knowing that some like Scale AI are investing in AI component of project, and other cluster can go more for social or more manufacturing excellence, or let's say less AI but more in capacity building in the other impact and effect that partial project is supposed to do. Scale AI, July 21st, just a few days back, announced a new round of investment of 29 million. That's a continuation of the 120 million they already invested. And they had a call that was closing on June that they already made an announcement. So being able to announce another 21 million just a month after just told you that they are now evaluating project as they enter in the funnel, and that funnel has been shortened, and it's, you know, going very fast, less than a month in some case. If you go there, you have all the partner and the project is all settled, you know, from A to Z, so you can go fast. That's a proof that it's working at that level. PIC supercluster, the protein industry supercluster. I'm a member of PIC since the leadership summit back in Winnipeg a few years back, and they have issued, after a consultation, a pan-Canadian consultation, their new ecosystem capacity building program, which is a part of, I just want to give false number, but I guess it's 10% of the 352 million worth of the proposal of the PIC supercluster that was dedicated to that particular aspect of the strategy. It's completely different project that goes there. It's more, let's say, network approach, capacity building for ecosystem. And in that case, we are under proposal with a large group of stakeholders around Canada. Cannot speak too much about it because you know how those things goes. They are there and they don't, and they appear and they don't know until the end. But yes, it's going well, but it's a large partnership. And I guess this is something that really shape the way that people need to not work in silos, cooperate, in a concerted way. And this is what we see happening in Canada. In funding research, there's a large finance body in Canada. It's called the MyTax funding. It's for applied research. Before the COVID was $1 you invest from private, they give $3. Now it's 1 for 4 instead of 9 months, 1 month. I saw Mohammed, one of my first PhD that I co-supervised, he's on the participant today, but we deposit that project, that proposal, let's say a month and a half ago, and we already started to work on his thesis last week. So you see that when things can align, that can go fast. It's just a question of choice, policy, and in the operation to make all those things happen. But we see that it should have been taking like 9 months and we're already in. So that's pretty cool because he's working on special stuff that is interesting. And we have another group of 11 students that are already being approved. So you see that it's not just one case, it's 2 cases. So it's 12 people, 12 students, college, master, and PhD that are now involved in project, cluster-related project under special COVID-19 funding. So things can happen quickly when everybody align. In Quebec, fastly, Techno Montreal, the ITC cluster, Lydia Divry, the CEO at that time, was in Toronto in the panel, in one of the panel. She is now working with a city that we all already collaborated as well. They have issued that city recovery plan that include digital stuff, a fidelity program to support local food producer and stuff like that. So you see the transition up to the ground. Techno Montreal has embedded what they call in French, le mur des innovations technologiques. My opportunity to speak French today, so to represent Quebec. So this wall is evolving, and a second call for proposal under COVID to embed new feature, marketplace, and so on to connect and exchange between their members. So you see there's a transition there to under COVID, let's say resilience and the way they can be agile with their supply chain. So they're all trying to do stuff. We see things happening in the metal sector as well as the aluminum. I think it's a $13 million investment through Scale AI related to KPIs in order to monitor sustainability goals, environmental issue, last mile and stuff like that. You know, the green aluminum is important in the car making and the car sector, the ground transportation sector, where you're also involved, Arinda, but in multiple sectors. So if we can go green from the start, we can obviously transfer it to the other level and making greener product. So I'll stop there, and from the other question and discussion, I guess I'll be able to give other details. Thanks.
Thank you, Vincent. So just to also give everyone a bit of context, as you can tell, obviously Vincent has a long history in clusters and continues to work in the cluster space. So he mentioned a number of the various superclusters. So Scale AI is primarily based in Quebec. I know it also is also in Ontario as well. PIC is Protein Industries Canada. So that's a supercluster kind of in central Canada, focused on particularly protein, but in agriculture. And then MidTax is actually a not-for-profit organization. It's all across Canada. It's been around for more than 20 years, and they focus on research and training programs. So this is why you're hearing about academics and students, because that's what a lot of their funding is focused on. So just wanted to clarify a few of those things.
Yes, and it's interesting. I'm from Quebec. I'm working with the University of Ottawa, University McGill in Montreal. So you see, yes, it's a pan-Canadian program, and it's not about where you are located. It's about getting the experience, the knowledge you need to do the project that you want to put in place.
Absolutely. And I think part of this speaks to the fact that we are such a large country. And I think, as Michaela mentioned, we are very sparsely located, where we don't have a massive population, but just a large geographic country. So my question, I'm going to start off just kind of taking a step back and just ask you, from your perspective, what is a cluster? I ask this because I know that a number of you obviously have experiences working with European clusters and other clusters from around the world. And so maybe the way you define a cluster and what a cluster does might be really different within the Canadian context. So, and obviously I know Rob talked a little bit about metrics and definitions as well, so feel free to include that. But maybe I will start with Rob then, and to share what you think. What is a cluster from a Canadian perspective?
So we'll kind of start at the high end, and everyone is likely familiar with the term sector, and sectors are usually based on some sort of industry classification system. So it's companies that do the same thing or in a sector. So I like using the example of tortilla manufacturers. So in Canada, we actually have an industry classification that tells us exactly how many tortilla manufacturers there are. Okay, but that's fine in understanding one group of companies, but it doesn't show you the supply chain. And that's really what the clusters are. Okay, it's kind of that supply chain, because that tortilla manufacturer is going to rely on, the corn and wheat growers, the processors, the grocery stores. So that's your supply chain, for the tortilla manufacturers. Okay, and when you start talking about a cluster, well, it's a supply chain, but it's on steroids, because it's all about the collaboration, okay, between the universities that may be doing the research, the governments that may be providing that very support, and also outside stakeholders. So to me, you know, a cluster is really the supply chain. But it does make it difficult to define it because there's no true industry classification system on that.
Great. What, Michaela, what about you? What are your thoughts? I know you're relatively, when I first reached out to Michaela to be part of this webinar, I basically told her I feel like her organization does clusters work. So I don't know if that was the first time you heard about clusters. And
yeah, not the first time, but
okay.
No, you're right. We hadn't really formalized it as a cluster, but I think for me, what is really important in defining clusters is kind of to start out with a vision and an intention. And in terms of, I can really speak in terms of the built environment here in British Columbia. And so the regulatory environment for us is really key. I mentioned that before, but it's really important. We see that over and over again, that it's regulation that actually creates the market demand and the supply for high performance buildings here. And so what allows us, ZEBEX, to operate is the regulators to set out the pathway for industry to reduce emissions, but then that allows industry to have certainty to innovate and to invest and also to upskill. We see there's a huge training and retraining requirement, and without the regulations setting out the pathway and the requirement for that, we don't think it would happen. So I think actually that governmental intervention at the outset is really important.
Yeah, I think that really highlights, especially here in Canada, and maybe similar to that of our European colleagues, just the importance of government. I mean, Rob, you being worked for one in the development, or at least in clusters. Vincent, over to you, since you have a lot of experience in this space.
Yeah,
so.
I have the chance to live in a province where the cluster initiative is support cluster organization to perform the works of mobilizing and promoting and doing the strategy review and the action plan, the implementation and the follow-ups of project that makes things happen. So it's really it's a particular place in Canada where we have around 36 or 38 regional cluster with about 11 Montreal community cluster, which that is 2 program, but at the end in the funnel, they do the same. They do joint project together, but in terms of organization, the organization way of looking at cluster, yes, we have people dedicated to make it happen. But as we see in Canada is you have related organizations that use cluster tool or the cluster approach or the design thinking strategy approach to make things happen for their sector, as Rob has mentioned, as Michaela is doing. So at the end of the day, I'm working with a lot of trade associations that evolved implementing tools and strategies that are part of the cluster world. We hear a lot. I'm working with McGill University, the McGill Center for the Convergence of Food, Health, and Economy. They use the convergence approach that has been developed by the Laurette Dubé, the doctor in place, who developed that over 30 years of practice. So it's compatible. It's an extension of Michael Porter's work. But at the end, we're doing things that in context of our own territory, in context of our political setup, that fit with the tools we have. It's about the resources we put in. And here, I'm glad to be here and to have over the year evolved my practice based on the Tci Global Connection, the knowledge journey that I have been part of. And I guess that from my end, it's compatible. I'm working with people that from the West Coast, the different cluster. You have people that want to make it happen. That's the first thing. The community of the willing, then extend and make things happen globally in your extended ecosystem, from the sector supply chain to the value chain, and then to the ecosystem extended approach, getting all the knowledge provider, the academia, and all the people that want to make things different. I guess it's a question of time and money and dedication over time.
Yeah, building off of the, sorry, Rob, go ahead.
No, okay. So I was just going to say, one thing that's really important is I noted, a number of times is references to the number of clusters, and there's a process of formalizing a cluster, and that usually implies that you have a cluster management organization. But clusters are naturally occurring. Okay, whenever you have a bunch of companies working together, that's your supply chain, that's your cluster. So for example, in Toronto, in the green sector, we don't have any formalized clusters, but we have in the green sector we've tracked over 250 supply chains, which are clusters in their own right. So when I talk about the bike cluster, okay, there is no organization doing anything for that, okay, except the City of Toronto. And in that case, I'm working kind of as the, what I call the cluster management or manager, okay, to help that cluster grow. And I think that's the really critical element, is that, to get the cluster to maximize its growth, you need someone in charge of providing a little bit of direction or cohesion to that cluster.
Yeah, absolutely. And is that, given the fact that obviously we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and kind of looking at all of your roles, I think Vincent has mentioned a lot of really great examples of where collaboration is happening.
Mm-hmm.
How's the pandemic affected, I guess, your ability to enable collaboration? Maybe there's opportunities, but maybe there's challenges. If you can maybe share, has your work changed at all? I don't know, Michaela.
Happy to jump in here. So for us, Zebex, just in terms of like absolute immediate and direct effects of the pandemic, where that we had to pivot and offer all of our events and courses and training online, which has actually been really positive because it has allowed us to reach a much wider audience geographically, and I think also locally, because people are also to some extent more available to attend courses and retrain. So that's definitely been a positive, as well as the fact that we really offer all of our events pretty much for free, because our core funding, our core activities are being funded by different organizations. So that has been quite popular. One of the things I also wanted to mention is that the provincial government, as well as here locally, the Vancouver Economic Commission, has consulted with Zebex about our thoughts and recommendations for economic recovery, because we're so close to industry. And so what are the things that we've been hearing? And so we put forward 3 particular recommendations. And the first one was that, yes, there's a lot of retraining and upskilling that is needed for high performance buildings without the pandemic, just in terms of new skills that existing workers will need, as well as new type of workforce that will need to enter in the future. And so we really recommended to launch a competition for training providers, and not just give a set funding to training providers without a lot of innovation or criteria as to what they would have to deliver. The second thing we recommended is to invest into a high performance training facility. So that's actually a local facility here where people could do training. And we've been thinking a lot about, installation, of course, and envelope that people need to be retrained on, as well as mechanical systems. Heat pumps are really top of mind and a very, I would say, something that everybody is talking about. Where we don't have a lot of manufacturers here locally in BC because we are so remote, and most training centers are based in the US. And so instead of sending everybody to the US to get retraining, we recommended that there should be a provincially funded training organization or facility here. And then finally, is just to also provide funding for a coalition to be formed around building electrification. That's something that Zebex is very much involved in. We're just helping to create a roadmap for building electrification and decarbonization in British Columbia. And so as part of that, for the implementation, the next step is to really formalize that in terms of a coalition, of a multi-stakeholder coalition. And so we've recommended to have base funding, as Rob mentioned, like actually resourcing those organizations is really important for them to take place and grow and implement some of the recommendations.
Absolutely. Good to see a lot of the work continues. Rob or Vincent?
I would say, I'll jump in. In the case of local government, it's actually been a challenge to keep working on cluster development. The city, we were, with the shutdown and all the concerns of individual businesses, we were very focused on helping individual companies. So, the work on clusters is really how do you help a group of companies that might be 20, 30, or 40 at a time, sort of thing. So we had to step back from a lot of the work we were doing in clusters. So we were kind of working again with individual companies, but we were also called on to look at, what is the overall green sector, and what are the challenges every company in the green sector is dealing with. So in that respect, so we set up what was called the Green Economic Advisory panel, and during the year on that, and it was with the province, and what it was bringing in, the top organizations or industry trade organizations in the green sector together in Toronto and Ontario to start talking about what the challenges are and where there are opportunities in collaboration. So it's a little bit higher than the cluster level, but I think it's really valuable process for the industry in Canada to start collaborating together. It's not just a solar organization or energy storage organization. We're all in this together, so we've got to work together on that. The other thing is that, there are opportunities in building clusters through these what are called international challenges that are starting to come up. Okay, and the Helsinki is a good example of that. The city of Helsinki has issued this Helsinki Energy Challenge. So it's a competition, okay, to develop we'll say the next stage of heating a whole community with zero carbon. And it's a competition which requires a cluster to come together and to put in a proposal of how this cluster can resolve Helsinki's problems. So with the City of Toronto, we've been working developing a cluster approach to put in a proposal for the Helsinki Energy Challenge.
Yeah, Vincent, what about you?
Yes, if I can give an example of from the food processing sector in Quebec. I'm involved in the food processing sector with the Quebec Food Processing Council that regroup 23, 25 associations of different layers into the supply chain of the agri-food sector in Quebec. And when the closure came the end of March, all the restaurants were closing, all the hotel, the institutional kitchen were closing. So there was a disruption in how things were going the day before the closure and the day after, because all the producers were stuck with tremendous amount of merchandise that were, and fresh food and fresh product that were not going to be served on your plate in a restaurant. And in Quebec and probably generally in Canada, restaurants and that the HRE sector represent 37% of the food consumption every day. So when it does not go through, there's a lot of things that doesn't go well. And we were sitting with the people from the CETAC, the Quebec Council I was talking about, the Canadian Retailer Association, all the big ones that have grocery stores like Walmart, Sobeys, Metro, IGA, and all the one in Canada that you might not know, but even Walmart and Costco were there, explaining how they were having difficulty in getting the product on the shelf. So habitually in Canada, there's a rule which is called the backdoor rules. 90% of what you see on shelves of product space is relying on national agreement. And when it comes to local food, local producer, it's 10% roughly made on a daily basis. So under the COVID pandemic, with the closure, we settled with all of those people, and they are using my platform that we have at Divisio. And based on the challenges and the needs expressed by the different players, we had layer of information which are geolocally, it's under the GIS system, so we can see where things are, the assets. And the local producer and the local food processor were entering daily inventory that were only seen by the retailers, and they were sourcing around their grocery store, not for a specific, let's say, trademark of ketchup or mustard or whatsoever. It's about getting ketchup on that space. It's not about the trademarks anymore. especially when there's closure. So yes, they were looking around their store, so they were saving times, they were saving on logistic costs, being able to pay more for local producer because they were saving a lot on the other stuff. And a lot of people that were not habitually going on the shelves, they were going to the HRE sector, made smart adjustment to the production, being able to implement fastly the labeling fact that were needed to go on shelves. And then now they sell to retailers. Before they were selling to restaurant and hotel, they adjust the packaging, and now you see the benefit of resiliency and integrity of supply chains in action. It's a feat for us in smart retailing and going from smart industry to smart retailing. But I guess things will evolve. It was done under the pressure of the pandemic. Now things will evolve because we have more time to think and to see every aspect of those smart inventory. But locally, it has saved a lot of time. And it has also embedded local distribution capacities to do the last mile, because there was not like national distribution company. They were taking local distributors, local fleets that were doing other stuff the day before the closure, but there was no school people to bring to activities. They were empty fleet, and they were using those fleet to do food distribution the day after. Trying to do an example in 2 minutes. Sorry, it's a fast one.
Absolutely, and no, I think it's a good point to make in terms of food. I know that this is such a great example, similar to what Barb was saying around the panel, where government is working directly with industry to really make things happen. I think in the case of food, they needed almost to change. It was the labeling that was keeping a lot of manufacturers from actually selling directly to retailers and into the hands of consumers. So it's really great to see how quickly they could pivot.
There's also just one thing. There's also an example of cluster and trade association that are teaming with the federal government to be sure that the good company or the strategic one receive, let's say in the food transformation, the CETAC helped to distribute the $50 million, which is dedicated to the food processing sector in Quebec. But it's not something just to have the money. Sometimes there's key issue which people don't know, but if this one closes, it will affect 20. So it's like network nodes. You need to know which one are strategic. Cluster are good for that.
Absolutely. So I'm going to focus now a bit on the recovery piece. So sustainability and climate change are often seen as nice to haves and not need to haves. So I guess, what's your experience with this? Has the pandemic made this more difficult? I know obviously there is a call for a green recovery, but what do you say to naysayers, and what do you say to those who are not necessarily part of a green cluster as to why this is important? So I don't know if we want to start with Rob.
Sure. You know, I think in a general sense, okay, you're just talking about clusters. There's a much more acknowledgement, you know, that local supply chains are becoming much more critical. You know, particularly at the beginning, it was difficult, for example, to get, you know, personal protection equipment. Okay, and so a lot of companies locally started, for example, making masks. Okay, but they were running out of fabric, so they had to source the fabric locally. And all of a sudden, you had that natural clusters developing because people were sourcing local materials. And clusters are local. Okay, they're not a global. You know, they're not. You can't have a global cluster. You can't have a national cluster. Generally, it's companies that are usually within 50 or 60 kilometers of each other, because it's collaboration that is so important in making a true cluster work. That's general, but I think in the specific to green sector clusters, I think there's a much more awareness in society that Mother Earth can hit us really hard, okay, and when we least expect it. So, you know, and that's really what, you know, the biggest challenge I think with the climate change is everyone pushes it out to sometime in the future. Well, this pandemic, okay, shows that you got to be prepared for the future, and that future can be pretty severe if you're not ready for it. You know, and I've been talking to a lot of companies in Toronto that are working on clean energy, and their requests for self-reliance and resiliency at a local level has gone through the roof, okay, as everyone wants to have more control over the whole lifestyle, life and things like that. And that's really what, a lot of what environment is about, okay? It's local resiliency and having more control about the decisions that individuals can make.
And what about you, Michaela? Is that also your experience?
Yeah, so I wanted to give an example in terms of climate change communication and post-COVID recovery. And it was just interesting for me to learn that there was a market survey was commissioned during the month of May to understand for the provincial and the local governments how they should be directing their communication post-COVID. And so the results of the survey were really encouraging and actually showing that the BC population, their trust in government has increased because there is actually the perception that the local government has dealt with the crisis and is dealing with the crisis positively. And then also that British Columbians are quite optimistic when it comes to the post-COVID recovery, and they expected that it can be transformational and also be more societally focused. And so actually the recommendations from the survey was that to use the post-COVID recovery as an opportunity to be very proactive on climate and also not to be sensitive around how you frame it and what type of communication you use, but definitely use this as a window of opportunity to be very proactive on climate change action and communication. So that was a very positive sign. And then I just wanted to mention that in terms of BC, we definitely notice a lot of clean tech companies, especially small SMEs, that have been affected by the crisis, and they've seen job losses, they've seen liquidity losses, and so on. So I think I'm not quite sure exactly what the government is doing, but some of the recommendations have been that the very first thing is that we need to help them to survive. That's sort of, they need to remain in market, and then for other industry sectors, it's to help them pivot to clean tech projects. And so I think one of the things that ZEVIX has been involved in, and also the Commission, is to kind of outline to more traditional industry stakeholders what the opportunities are in numbers. So you kind of translate it into, this is the market demand that is going to be there for high performance windows, for doors, for heat pumps, for heat recovery ventilators. That's kind of the space that we are in, and that's driven by regulation. But then also really importantly is sort of connecting businesses to clients, I think, as well as to each other. I think what I've understood is that in BC, businesses have been good at being connected to academia. There's been a strong link between industry and academia and research, but there's been not such a strong link in terms of innovation with each other and collaboration, as well as also really focusing on the clients and on the market demand and what they want. So that's something that we're trying to highlight more.
Great, thank you. Yeah, communication definitely, and metrics definitely key. Vincent, about you, sustainability, yeah.
Yes, there's a lot of discussion about sustainability, circular economy, and industrial synergy, and the cooperation at the strategic asset level within clusters in Canada. From the 16, I guess, proposal I'm in, 4 of them have already started, and at the end, I guess 12 of them will use my new functionality on circular economy and tenders and trade offers. Both on the supply and the demand side. It's a 360 kind of new things. I don't want to speak too much about it, but just to tell you that there's a good trend about the people who want to not only work on the principle, but to put in place and try stuff that will enable it on a daily basis, helping people to find what they need. As mentioned, Rob was mentioning, companies sometimes do funny stuff, end of the day, Friday, they put 3 hours and they will produce 2,000 masks. They're from the textile sector. They're known as doing furniture, but on the exchange system, they will put those 2,000 masks and they will just put it on the personal protection sector, and you will see that then, and someone can purchase it, and if they want to give it to schools or to per kind of stakeholder within the ecosystem, it will be a dedicated offer. So It's not a sale, it's a gift. And then you say to who you want to give it, and then those people can call you and take hold on the assets. So those are principles. What we see is a lot of things about food resiliency. Food sovereignty is not about political issue. It's about local action. It's about local capacities to supply food that, as we say with the McGill Center of the Conversion of Food and Economic, we say that food that people want, that they can afford, and they can also that is good for their lifestyle. You know, it's about the nutrition factor. So it's all important. We see a project in the West which is about vertical farming with I don't want to use bad words. I'm French speaking. I'll say First Nation. Sorry if it's not good, but yes, it's about following key point indicator about diabetes, and just hope I'm using the good word there. But yes, it's about being able to follow health program with also what's coming in as input for your health. What are you eating? If you can follow that, then you have a path to recovery, or at least better knowledge of your own situation, and do you act on it or not? And for food security at the territorial level, there's a lot of things about embedding at the ecosystem level, community shelters, people around Moisson Montreal, or they have the same in Vancouver, you know, those great organizations that support, let's say, 300 or 500 local shelters. When those organizations are connected to food cluster that help reduce food waste, that help to get the competitive advantage. Sometimes, of course, are good that will expire in 3 days. You can dynamic pricing and stuff like that. You know, it's a systemic approach that is embedded in the circular concept. But there's so much to that, you know, that's just not about circular. There's economic gain, societal gain there. It's worth the while to work on it.
Absolutely, yeah, and thanks for bringing the food, I think, aspect into this too, because I think it is.
It's everywhere.
It is everywhere. We need it, and certainly, I think a conversation is part of sustainability. So, we are just about to enter into our Q&A time, so please feel free to put your questions in if you haven't already. And so, yeah, I'm going to pass it over to Patricia to.
Thank you, Dorinda. Thank you, everyone. This was really interesting. Well, the chat is burning here. We have a question about the specific timing that we are living, you know, with the COVID and that. So what is your recommendation to where to start after COVID with how should green clusters react if they are, let's say, old, and how to start from zero if it is something you want to build in? And something linked to this, future recommendation for entrepreneurship. Who wants to start?
I can say the closure came on March 13 at 10 o'clock in my incubator. I've never been back on my incubator. I'm SMEs. I have a lot of funding that come from the Canadian or the Quebec funding program to support SMEs. But I can tell you that 2 hours after, I had my first call for food security and food processing sector. And it has never ended since then, even the weekend. Yeah, so we started the day started, and I guess, yeah, you jump in because you need to do something right now.
There is much more of an emphasis of a local made, okay, you know, initiative, you know, as I think an outcome of the pandemic, okay, is that there's much more, you know, we need to produce this ourselves. So whether it's food or whether it's bike or what have you. You know, and, you know, the Ontario government has kind of come up with a Made in Ontario directory listing all the products that are made in Ontario. When we're doing the same thing in Toronto, is that we've got a Toronto Made initiative, which is going to identify all the different things that are made in Toronto. So that's great because, I mean, you're dealing with the local manufacturers, but, you know, to go that one step, okay, further is, well, you know, the manufacturer is only one part of the process. You know, how can we build that Made in Toronto into, you know, into the entire cluster that fits into that? So I think that's really where there's big economic opportunities for companies, is to, we always talk about, think global. Well, this might be an opportunity to start thinking locally, okay, and connecting with companies that, are not direct competitors to yourself, okay, but where there's some opportunities to collaborate with, okay. And those two companies or cluster, okay, will become much more competitive in supplying products locally.
Yeah, maybe just to add to what, to add what Rob has just said, I think that's really true. The local aspect, I think, is really important. One of my thoughts just in general, of course, is to start small and nimble and, stay flexible. It's going to be really important, and be content with small successes. I think that's going to be important. Like if for Zebex, for instance, we were founded 2 years ago with just 2 staff. Now we have doubled, we're 4 people. And I think that's a really good number for us right now. And we're not going to go much bigger. That's not the intent. And we're more focusing on our core mandate, I think, instead of expanding. One of the other things I just wanted to say, Rob has emphasized the, building or working locally and focusing on your local clients. But I think there's also another big opportunity in terms of remote working and virtual activities and services. So anybody who has got, good skills in terms of how to build a team remotely. I mean, there's really amazing examples of companies that have thousands of employees who all work at home remotely and are very successful at that. And so I think if you can also find a niche of some service or product, and that was traditionally delivered in person and is now done, can now be done remotely. I think we've all seen those switches, and I'm assuming that that's something that will be a lasting change. So that's certainly comes top of mind.
I can just add, I saw a lot of formula for product and drawings and open source stuff coming from Europe to Canada. That was cool, that companies and cluster was exchanging ways to realize and to create medical furniture, masks and stuff. I don't know if you have received plan or drawing from Canada, but we have received a lot of suggestions from Europe that was very interesting. And I guess it was a great opening from Europe to North America that was done there. And what I see is that there's a lot of smart specialization in a way that local government are contacting different set of company to do masks, to do different things that they're not able to import because someone has make a big wall or something like that. So yes, we have those things that happen sometimes, but that's sometimes, incomfort will create the energy to make the change. And I guess that has been a bit of that we have experienced in the last few months. But we see companies that were doing clean rooms that are now doing things for oxygens for people in hospital and stuff like that. So yes, people are shifting, but it's part of the resiliency, and sometimes cluster can help and can help government to find those companies who have the capacities or the technology, the kits and the skills to do that. So it's where I believe there's a lot of good work for our kind of organization to help things happen, because they don't know the people in the other sector. Sometimes they are in the same sector, in the same city, and we still as cluster manager make networking to do that B2B meeting, and they are in the same city. So I guess when they're not in the same sector, and in Canada, you see the scale of our territory, it's a competitive advantage, but sometimes it's also another story.
Thank you, the three of you. One question, and I will reformulate a bit the question from Mohammed Saif to also link it to the work of the evaluation group in TCI. How can we best measure, or how can we evidence the value of working with clusters or through clusters? How are you working on that, and how you communicate that to the authorities, to the local community, to the many stakeholders you work with?
And I've done a lot of work in looking at economic evaluation of clusters in Toronto. And I think that's, a potential role for local municipalities, particularly economic development offices. Economic development, we have often research officers, okay, that will just look at numbers and tell us anything we want as it comes to numbers, sort of thing. But they need direction. How do you break those numbers into categories? So, that's what we've been doing, is trying to go through a process, of identifying, what companies are in the cluster, what NAICS they're in, and then using that to develop a model, if you will, okay, and that shows, what the economic impact is of those clusters. Then it makes it easier, so that if you have a specific initiative that supports a cluster, I'll use the example of the Urban Wood cluster, is that it was very difficult to get government to buy in to support that cluster because it was so small. They said it was only 100 people. It's not even the size of a medium-sized company. Okay, there's, what's the impact? Okay, well, we were able to show that we grew that, one medium company into 800, okay, employees over a matter of about 5 or 6 years. And that was a direct impact of the initiative that we took. So that's really powerful for government funding, okay, is showing your impact, okay, in economic terms.
Someone else who wants to elaborate?
Yes, in terms of evidence, actually, I haven't been involved in this directly. I've just heard this through the core clean tech cluster strategy, and as part of their recommendations that have come out, is really, for government and others, like the power of collaboration and connection and networks. And so evidence, and I'm not exactly sure how this has been measured, but that companies that are actually well connected and have good networks are, exponentially more successful and in terms of growth of talent and capital and so on. So I'm not quite sure exactly how this has been measured, but it's certainly something that has been evidenced that I think is in all of those strategies for cluster development, of course. So that's just one of the things that came to mind.
Yeah,
I also
wanted to, I know I'm the moderator, but I wanted to kind of put on my old hat a little bit. I think a lot of it is really hard, particularly, and I do commend, Rob's effort. I know the federal government has also tried to measure and to figure out, who's in clean tech, who's in the green clusters, because often they do, there's other clusters that they're a part of. So there's definitely challenges in that. You don't really want to double count, and there's, it's hard. I'm sure many of you who are in this space know that, but I also think it really does depend like who you're speaking to. I think a lot of the times the traditional measures of, are we creating new jobs and things like that, don't always apply, because a lot of the times clusters, it takes time, I think, to develop some of these partnerships. But I think the value really is in, I think many of you mentioned this, which is like bringing people together. And we're starting to see, even I'm on the panel that Rob mentioned, and all of us, I think some of them know each other. I certainly knew, but you're starting to see those connections, and I think we're going to continue to see that. And I don't think COVID has stopped that. I think COVID has actually introduced a lot of opportunity for that. So I think it is bringing people together and hearing some of the collaborations and the stories that come out of that.
If I can just add briefly, go ahead, Rob, if you want to add.
Just a quick comment. Okay, and one of the challenges with clusters is, when you're dealing with sector, you place a company in a sector and that's where the company is. Okay, but with clusters, you can have a company that's in multiple different clusters. Okay, and that makes it really difficult to track the overall impact of clusters, okay, because that one company could be, supplying, product A to one sort of client cluster, and then product B goes to another cluster. So that company is in 2 clusters already, and that's something people have to be cognizant about. Okay, is you're not categorizing companies by the clusters. Okay, the opportunity for clusters is to engage more companies into that.
Vincent, yes, you wanted
Yes,
to add
yes.
something.
Just to finish, to add on Rob, yes, it's important to see that fact, especially when you're using industrial classification, that sometimes doesn't embed, let's say, the more societal or what I call the B2 street kind of services, more related to the local traded approach. You need to at least embed those classification or consider it to get the full value of your ecosystem. And the way that we see that happening with the different measurement or the KPIs or the performance indicator. I'm glad you joined, Mohamed. So you see that my tax project with the University of Ottawa is running. Mohamed is with us. So thank you for the question. I know you're working also on the other KPIs, the one which are not the one that we from the E to Z list, they're not on the first sheet. So concerning sustainability, the green sector, things are moving along with the EU, sustainability goal. We start to hear that in Canada, which is good because we're not used to work with large world NGOs and stuff like that. But it's coming here. I see those new KPIs entering, let's say, the Canadian field calculator. So when it goes to those capacities for nutriment and stuff like that, when I see them there, it's because they are taking into account. And we see also green gas as other KPIs important for aluminum and other sectors. So if you're able to trade them one day, at least Quebec can do it with California. Maybe we'll have an extended market. But if you can at least calculate those impact on your product, and the importance is to be able to support your claim. So if you said you're clean label, you need to support it. And if you want one day to implement a compliance market, which is what you see is what you get kind of market, you don't need to do all those things. You're not worried about not receiving your things by FedEx or whatsoever. It's a compliance market. It's going to happen the way it said. And then you can give that value to the next layer of the supply chain, from the producer to the end user. You can retrieve the fact and to be able to say, I've got a proof, certified. Compliance market is the next big thing, I guess. It would save a lot of time to large company, and for final user like us for food, we'll ensure that what's in the can is what we need and what we believe which is in it. So other KPIs are important for other aspect of the performance of a company or a sector.
Thank you. And the last question from my side is about international linkages in times of COVID, of this disruption of global value chains and so on. I would like to know, well, there is a concrete, very concrete comment here. If the Canadian government is funding cluster projects for SMEs in South Africa. There was another question for Michaela on the differences between green building clusters in Europe and in Canada and so on. So very openly, what are it's your thought how the green clusters can make better in internationalization, in global value chains, in these odd times, let's say. Michaela,
I'm happy to start off here just with an example that I was aware of. There was recently a Europe and BC Clean Tech Roundtable that was held at the end of May, and that was really kind of recognizing that the impact of COVID-19 has really put a stop to traditional methods of trade and investment work, and a lot of delegation and traveling. And so there was a virtual roundtable, first of its kind, and one of the outcomes was really that there is in fact a lot of interest in supporting clean technology trade and investment opportunities. And that is the backdrop of that is, of course, the European Green Deal, as well as the, we call it the Clean BC, that's the climate plan of the provincial government here in BC, as well as the recent cluster strategy that was developed for BC. So we know that there is more certainty because governments have committed and have laid out the pathway. But so this particular roundtable was organized by the European consulates and cluster network, and technology opportunities that were highlighted in particular. There were several themes. One of them was hydrogen and fuel cells. Another one was for alternative fuel and power management. Carbon capture, utilization and storage was another one. The circular economy, And then finally, for the built environment, there was a lot of recognition of technology gaps that we have here in BC of products that are readily available in the EU, and sort of investment opportunities here around heat pumps, heat recovery ventilators, low embodied carbon insulation and tapes, and also building information modeling systems, so more on the software tool side. So yeah, I just wanted to say that that was some of the outcomes there. And I've heard that since that the EU delegation to Canada has put forward the possibility of organizing a workshop in Western Canada for clean tech companies. And so, yeah, I'm happy to connect anybody to the organizers if you're in Europe and want to reach out, or Canadian. I'm not responsible, but definitely can connect you to the right people. So I'll put my email address in the chat.
Thank you. Vincent or Rob?
Yes, I can we're working with a network of cities in Europe, and we have started with cities in Canada. What we see is the public contracts under cities, which the European and Canadian trade agreement, there's an opening for public markets. So what we see actually is cluster teaming with cities in order to promote green technology that are, technology that can more easily be exported because they are advanced technology. Sometimes it's not like you invented the wheel. You have new stuff. People can afford the price because it's new. It's there. It's relying on their own challenges. So those partial kind of trade can be easier than trying to sell a taxi car or something like that everybody at the end of the day can have more locally and something like that. So green technology can maybe more fit in the agreement for right now, because that's something that because there's a call for proposal, or the challenge approach that we see under the Smart City Challenge is a good way to enter those collaboration into, let's say, a consortium based on cluster members, even though it's a consortium of companies that came also from the international level. We just built our largest branch in Montreal. I guess things were coming from Spain, so and it's working.
And I'm going to, it'll seem like a contradiction to what I said earlier about, just focusing locally in building that local supply chain and everything. But the internationalization is actually a really critical component of that, because once you understand your local supply chain and you've got that good collaboration between local companies, then you can identify what are the gaps in the supply chain that we need to bring international expertise into. And this is where, starting local is really valuable, because then you get a much better cohesive view, of what your cluster supply chain is. And then you can go out internationally and source your best companies to bring into that supply chain. And that fits in very closely to, the foreign direct investment initiatives that a lot of regions are having. They're trying to bring companies in, from Europe or from Asia into Canada, and, so rather than just, dumping companies in, it's like, well, here's a local cluster that you would fit in perfectly for. And that's where there's a real good value for that. And then having that local supply chain, look at export opportunities. It helps significantly. So rather than having a bunch of competitors go over to Europe, say, and each competing with each other, to sell a product to, one set of companies or, clients, go over as a cluster, and then you have a huge opportunities to increase that offering to that region.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Dorinda, this was all from my side. I'll let you close the panel.
Great. So just want to say a big thank you to all of our panelists today. It means a lot, and it's great to hear from all of you more and what's going on locally and regionally. And a big thank you to everyone attending today. I know that we're all in different time zones, so if you are, joining us and it's very early morning, thank you for doing that. Or really late at night, maybe, depending on where you're joining us from. So I do also, again, want to thank the TCI Network for everything. They're doing a lot of really great work. There are a lot of webinars that they're doing, and they've been really amazing. I think, and it's really great, I think, in this time to kind of have us all join across the world. I think that's really important. So I don't know if Maretta, you want to end off with a few words to really, to really send us off.
Yeah, well, thank you, Dorinda, for great facilitation as always, and also thank you to Patricia for the same, and thanks for the panelists. It was a lot of good discussion again on a really difficult but still important topic. And again, also thank to all the attendees and participants. Of course, seen from European point of perspective, the understanding of a cluster and a cluster organization is, I mean, an ongoing debate. So it was great to hear your input from the Canadian side. But don't despair. I mean, in many countries, this is an ongoing journey. We have clusters calling themselves a cluster organization, and they might not be so much. And we also have organizations not calling themselves a cluster organization and actually running a cluster. So that's part of the journey in this, and the understanding. And I think it was very nice to hear your input, and also some of these very specific recommendations on how to work with sustainability and green transition, because this is really still on the agenda. So thank you to all of you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Let me share with you also a couple of next dates to book in your agendas in TCI. One is our global conference that was going to happen in Kazan in Russia, but due to the situation, we are going to go virtual on 14-15 October. We want to cover this beautiful theme, the clusters driving a new, better normal, and we want to discuss how to tackle the challenges ahead of us, how to reimagine sustainable living, how to lead with social changes, how to redesign the competitive strategies, and how to accelerate digital transformation. More information coming soon. And before that, on September 24, we have a global cluster matchmaking. We were talking about international linkages, and we are going to collaborate with Cluster Excellence Denmark and Enterprise Europe Network to do a virtual matchmaking event. We will send you the information, and you will see which clusters and which collaboration initiatives and innovation ecosystems you can matchmake with. Thank you very much, everyone. This was a great pleasure, and see you around in the next TCI North America webinar or gathering. Thank you, Dorinda.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Rob.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay safe. Bye, everyone.
Ciao.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.